You won't be needing this anymore, brother.
They say a lion's roar can be heard for 5 miles, but in his final hour, Chief Badmus couldn't even whisper loud enough to stop his own brother from stealing the gold watch off his wrist. As he lay dying on a bed wide enough to hold a village, the air in the room didn't smell like medicine, it smelled like greed. His brother, Matthew, wasn't praying for a miracle. He was counting the minutes until the heart monitor went silent. And his sister, Agatha, she was already dividing the mansions in her head like a hawk tearing into a fresh kill. But what none of them knew was that the dying man had one final trap waiting for them. And it started with a piece of paper they all called worthless. But while the greedy family members were busy counting their invisible riches, one soul remained anchored to the dying man's side. Close to his pillow, holding a hand that had grown as thin and cold as a winter branch, was Nneka. Nneka was a woman of quiet grace. She didn't wear gold that jingled when she walked, and her voice was like a cool stream in the heat of March. She had been Badmus's nurse before she became his wife. The family called her a husband snatcher. They said she used charms to blind the big man. But they didn't see the nights she stayed awake to rub his aching legs. They didn't see the way she cooked his favorite bitterleaf soup just the way his late mother used to. Badmus pulled Nneka closer. His eyes, once sharp, were now cloudy. "Nneka," he whispered, his voice sounding like dry leaves treading on stone. "The world thinks I am giving them a feast. But for you I have saved the seed. Do not look at the size of the gift, my wife. Look at the path it reveals." He pressed a small, crumpled piece of parchment into her palm. Before she could ask him what it meant, his hand went limp. The lion had gone to sleep. The mourning house was loud, but not with crying. It was loud with greed. 3 days after the burial, before the red mud on Badmus's grave had even dried, the family gathered in the great hall. The air was thick with the smell of expensive perfumes and expensive lies. The lawyer, a man with glasses so thick they hid his soul, cleared his throat. He held a thick stack of papers, the last will and testament of Chief Badmus. "To my brother, Chief Matthew," the lawyer began, "I leave the 5-star hotel in Lagos and the fleet of Mercedes cars in the garage." Matthew let out a loud shout of joy, slapping his thigh. "The gods be praised. I knew my brother loved me." "To my sister, Auntie Agatha," the lawyer continued, "I leave the mansion in Abuja and the shopping malls in the city center." Agatha fanned herself with a lace handkerchief, a smirk playing on her lips. She turned her head and looked at Nneka, who was sitting in a corner on a wooden stool, dressed in the black clothes of a widow. "Now," the lawyer's voice dropped, "to my wife, Nneka. Chief Badmus leaves no money, no houses, no cars, no shares in the oil company." The room went silent. Then, a low titter of laughter began to grow. It started with Agatha and spread to the cousins and the uncles. "I told you," Agatha barked, pointing a finger at Nneka. "He finally woke up before he died. He saw you for the gold digger you are. Not even a kobo. Not even a single rusty nail." The lawyer held up a hand. "Wait, he did leave her one thing. This hand-drawn map of the old family cocoa farm in the village." He handed a piece of paper to Nneka. It was the same parchment Badmus had given her on his deathbed. It looked old. It looked worthless. Looked like a joke. Chief Matthew stood up, his belly shaking with laughter. "A map to a dead farm. A farm where even the weeds refused to grow. Badmus was a genius. He gave us the meat and gave the dog the bone to chew on." Nneka stood up slowly. Her heart was heavy, yes. Not because of the money she didn't get, but because of the cruelty in the eyes of the people her husband had called family. She looked at the map. It was drawn in black ink, with a small red X, deep in the forest where the cocoa trees had long since withered. "I will take my map," Nneka said softly. Her voice didn't shake. "And I will leave this house. May the peace of the dead remain with you all." "Oh, you are leaving now," Agatha screamed. "Pack your rags. Don't take even a spoon from this kitchen." Everything in this house belongs to people with royal blood, not a girl who smells like hospital medicine. Nneka didn't argue. She went to the small room she shared with her husband. She took only her booba, her wrapper, and her Bible. She tucked the map into the bosom of her dress. As she walked out of the massive iron gates of the mansion, the security guards, men she used to feed and give extra money to, turned their heads away. They didn't want to be seen helping a woman who was now a nobody. She stood on the dusty road, the sun beating down on her black headscarf. She had no car. She had no house. She had only a piece of paper and a memory of a man who told her to trust the ink. "Where will you go, Nneka?" she asked herself. She looked at the map. The village was 6 hours away by a rickety bus. She had only 3,000 naira in her purse, money she had saved from selling her own handmade beads. "I will go where the ink leads," she whispered. "Because a man who loved me like he did would not send me into the forest to die for nothing." Behind her, the sounds of a party were already starting in the mansion. The family was popping champagne, celebrating their new wealth. They didn't know that some gifts are like the morning mist, here now and gone when the sun gets hot. And they didn't know that the paper in Nneka's hand was not just a map. It was a mirror. The dust of the city was still settling on Nneka's skin as the rickety yellow bus groaned toward the village of Umweke. The seats were hard, and the air smelled of dried fish and sweat, but Nneka's mind was far away, tracing the lines on that old parchment. As the bus bumped along the potholed roads, she noticed something strange. The map wasn't just a drawing of land. It had tiny riddles written in the corners in her husband's neat, slanted handwriting. One caught her eye. The man who seeks the fruit must first water the root of another. She arrived at the village square as the sun was beginning to dip behind the palm fronds, casting long orange shadows. The village wasn't as she remembered. It was quiet, and the people looked weary. Nneka made her way toward the old primary school, the first landmark on her map. The school was a ghost of its former self. The roof was sagging, and the welcome sign was hanging by a single rusty nail. Sitting on a stone near the entrance was an old man, his skin like wrinkled leather, trying to patch a hole in his tattered schoolteacher's jacket. This was Mr. Obi, the man who had taught Badmus his first ABCs 50 years ago. "My daughter," the old man said, his voice whistling through the gaps in his teeth. "Are you lost? This place has nothing left to give." Nneka knelt in the dust, a sign of respect that made the old man's eyes soften. "I am not lost, Papa. I am the wife of Badmus. He sent me here." The old man flinched at the name. Badmus, the billionaire. He forgot this village long ago. He forgot the roof that sheltered his brain and the books that fed his mind. Nneka felt a sting of shame for her husband, but she looked at her purse. She had only 2,000 naira left after the bus fare. It was all she had for food and a place to sleep. But the riddle in the corner of the map burned in her mind. Water the root of another. She stood up, walked to the small village market stall that was closing up, and bought a bag of cement and a small tin of blue paint. She spent every last kobo she had. "What are you doing, girl?" Mr. Obi asked as Nneka began to mix the cement with water from a nearby stream. "Fixing the step, Papa," she replied, her black morning clothes getting stained with gray dust. A teacher should not have to trip before he enters his classroom. For 3 hours, under the light of a flickering lantern, Nneka worked. She patched the broken step and painted the door. Her hands were blistered, and her stomach roared with hunger, but she felt a strange peace she hadn't felt in the big mansion in Lagos. When she finished, Mr. Obi walked over, touching the wet paint with a trembling finger. He looked at Nneka, and for the first time he smiled. "Badmus told me a woman would come," the old man whispered. "He said if she has a heart of stone, she will ask for the gold immediately. But if she has a heart of flesh, she will see the broken step first." He reached into the pocket of his tattered jacket and pulled out a heavy, rusted iron key. It didn't look like it belonged to a school. It looked like it belonged to a gate. "He left this with me 10 years ago," Mr. Obi said. He told me to give it to the woman who fixes the step. He said the map is a body, but this key is the soul. Nneka took the key, her heart thumping against her ribs. The first test was over. But as she slept that night on a thin mat in the school's staff room, she didn't know that back in the city, the gold the family was celebrating was already starting to turn into lead. In Lagos, Chief Matthew was screaming at the lawyer. The five-star hotel he had inherited was not making money. It was under a government seal for billions of naira in unpaid taxes. Every cent Matthew tried to withdraw from the company accounts was blocked. The wealth was a cage, and the bars were made of debt. But Nneka knew nothing of their trouble. At dawn, she followed the map deeper into the forest, toward the widow's well. The path was overgrown with thorns that tore at her dress, but she didn't stop. She reached the well, but it wasn't empty. Standing there was a group of young men, the village bullies, led by a man named Jude. They were blocking a frail, elderly woman from drawing water. "Pay the tax, Mama." Jude laughed, kicking the woman's plastic bucket. "Nothing in this village is free anymore, not even the water from the ground." Nneka stepped out from the shadows. She had no money left, and she was just one woman against four men. But she remembered Badmus's voice. "Truth is a shield that never breaks." "Leave her alone," Nneka said, her voice steady like a drumbeat. Jude turned, a sneer on his face. "And who are you?" "Another widow coming to cry. This well belongs to us now." Nneka walked forward. She didn't look at their sticks or their angry faces. She looked at the old woman. "This water belongs to the earth, and the earth belongs to God. If you want a tax, take my wedding ring." She began to pull the gold band from her finger, the only thing of value she had left. The old woman grabbed Nneka's hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "Keep your gold, my daughter," the old woman said. Her eyes were not the eyes of a helpless villager. They were sharp and knowing. She turned to Jude and the boys. "Go home to your mothers. The play is over." To Nneka's shock, the bullies didn't fight. They lowered their heads and walked away in total silence. The old woman turned back to Nneka and smiled. "I am the mother of the lawyer you saw in the city," the woman revealed. "My son is a good man, but he serves a master who wanted to be sure. My son told Badmus that a billionaire's wife would never stand for a stranger. You proved him wrong." She reached into the bucket she had drawn from the well. At the bottom, hidden under the water, was a small, sealed plastic cylinder. She handed it to Nneka. "Inside this is the coordinate for the farm," the woman said. "But be careful, Nneka. Your husband's family is not far behind. They have realized the houses in the city are empty shells, and they are coming for the land." Nneka thanked her and hurried toward the cocoa farm. Her legs were heavy, and her breath was short, but she could see the X on the map glowing in her mind. She reached the farm just as the sun reached its peak. It was a sad sight. The cocoa trees were black and shriveled, their branches reaching up like skeletal hands. But in the center of the field stood a giant, ancient Iroko tree that seemed to defy the dryness of the land. As she knelt beneath the tree to consult the coordinates, the sound of a loud car engine shattered the silence. A black SUV, covered in dust, roared into the farm. Chief Matthew and Auntie Agatha jumped out, their expensive lace clothes torn by the bushes. They looked desperate. They looked like animals backed into a corner. "There she is," Agatha screamed, pointing at Nneka. "I knew it. She was hiding the real treasure here. Move away from that tree, you witch." Matthew pushed Nneka aside, his face red with greed. "Where is it? Is it buried under the roots?" "Everyone dig." They began to claw at the dirt with their bare hands, cursing and sweating, convinced that boxes of diamonds were hidden beneath the soil. Nneka stood back, watching them. She felt no anger, only a deep sadness. She looked at the rusted key in her hand. She looked at the coordinates. They weren't pointing to the dirt. They were pointing to a hollow knot in the trunk of the Iroko tree, 5 feet above the ground. While the in-laws were busy burying themselves in the dust of their own greed, Nneka calmly stepped toward the tree. She reached into the hole and felt a cold, metallic surface. She inserted the key. There was a soft click, not the sound of a lock, but the sound of a legacy beginning. The lock didn't groan like old iron. It clicked with the precision of a modern bank vault. As Nneka turned the rusted key, a small rectangular panel in the Iroko tree slid open, revealing a moisture-proof silver case. Behind her, Chief Matthew and Auntie Agatha were still frantically digging in the dirt, their fingernails bleeding, their expensive lace stained with the mud of a worthless farm. They looked like madmen searching for a ghost. "I found it!" Agatha shrieked, pulling a heavy stone from the earth. "This must be it. The gold is inside the stone." She began to bash the rock against the trunk of the tree, her eyes wide with a fever that no doctor could cure. Nneka ignored them. She opened the silver case. Inside sat a sleek black satellite phone and a rugged gold-plated USB drive. Attached to the drive was a final note. "The land does not hide wealth, Nneka. The land is the wealth. Press the green button." Nneka pressed the button on the satellite phone. It didn't ring, it hummed. A voice came through, crisp and professional. The voice of a man who dealt in billions, not naira but dollars. "Identity confirmed," the voice said. "Mrs. Nneka Badmus, we have been tracking your GPS coordinates since you entered the village school. The tests are complete. The International Mining Consortium is ready to finalize the lease for the lithium deposits under this soil. The initial signature bonus of $50 million has been moved to your private offshore account." Nneka stood still. $50 million. It was more than all the houses and cars in Lagos combined. At that moment, a fleet of white SUVs, not like the dusty one Matthew drove, but armored vehicles with government plates, pulled into the farm. Men in suits stepped out, followed by the lawyer from the city. But he wasn't looking at Matthew anymore. He walked straight to Nneka and bowed his head. "Madam," the lawyer said, his voice full of a respect that hadn't been there before, "I apologize for the theater in the city. Your husband knew his family better than anyone. He knew that if he gave you the money directly, they would sue you, harass you, or worse. He needed them to think you were a beggar so they would leave you alone long enough to claim the real crown." Matthew scrambled out of the hole he had dug, his face covered in grime. "What? Lithium? 50 million. That's my brother's money. It belongs to the bloodline." The lawyer turned to him, his face cold. "The bloodline is currently in debt, Chief Matthew. The mansions you were so eager to grab, they were collateral for a loan Badmus took out years ago to buy this very farm. Since you accepted the inheritance of the houses, you also accepted the inheritance of the debt. The banks are seizing your cars as we speak. You're not a billionaire, sir. You are a bankrupt man." Agatha dropped her stone. It fell on her foot, but she didn't even feel the pain. She looked at Nneka, the woman she had called a hospital girl, the woman she had kicked out into the street. "Nneka," Agatha stammered, crawling toward her on her knees. "My daughter. You know I was only joking. We are family. You cannot let us sleep on the street." Nneka looked down at her. She remembered the cold night in the school, the blisters on her hands from the cement, and the way the security guards turned their backs. But she also remembered the old teacher's smile and the widow at the well. "I will not let you sleep on the street," Nneka said softly. "I am building a processing plant on this land. It will need many laborers to clear the brush and carry the stones. I will give you a job there. You will earn your bread by the sweat of your brow, just as you expected me to do." "Laborers?" Matthew gasped. "We are chiefs. In the city you were chiefs," Nneka replied, turning toward the white SUVs. "But on this farm, you are just people who don't know how to dig a hole properly." As Nneka climbed into the lead vehicle, she looked out the window one last time. The Iroko tree stood tall, its secret finally told. She realized then that Badmus hadn't just left her money. He had left her her dignity. He had let her prove to the world and to herself that she was exactly who he thought she was. The convoy drove out of the village, leaving the greedy family standing in the dust of the farm they had mocked. The sun was setting, but for Nneka, a new day was just beginning. The hands that are too clean to work are often too dirty to hold true wealth. Character is a map that always leads to the treasure.